When society reaches a certain mass, there comes a point where the people who are producing goods become very strongly separated from those who are then consuming them. There are a lot of inevitable consequences that come from this, and part of the problem with these particular consequences is that we are not seeing the outcome of the things that our society is creating. For example, you go into a grocery store and you buy a pound of meat or whatever. You do not see all of the animal suffering that went into creating that product. And not to say that you should be a vegetarian, but you should consider where your meat is coming from. You should consider how the animal that you're going to consume is being treated. And very often, more often than not, the animal goes through this process through which, by any humanitarian standard, would be considered. Another consequence to consider is genetically modified crops. A lot of people do not know that in India, where the cotton farming is going on, that 250,000 Indian farmers have actually committed suicide because of genetically modified cotton crops and certain issues with not making enough money and not being able to feed their families, and there's a lot of very terrible things going on as a result of our dependence on genetically modified foods and products. Now, I'm not here to tell you that these things are all evil necessarily, though there are certainly terrible things that result from them. They are also, in a sense, meeting a certain need. As long as that need exists, we are always going to have things like factory farming of animals and genetically modified crops. As long as we are not actually localizing things or purchasing things differently, this is kind of the way things are. This way of operating things is kind of like a necessity for the way our culture is interacting with itself right now. Of course, this can change, but it's not going to change by its own means. It has to change by people actually deciding to do something differently. And if you are not aware of the consequences of buying into these particular products, but you would oppose them if you were, then you live in this sort of state of ethical dissonance where you are supporting this particular evil from your perception without actually even knowing that you are doing it. So this is kind of the result of separating all of the different participants in the society, the producers and the consumers. You get people who are not aware of exactly what's happening. In a smaller community, then it would be very obvious to you what's happening, and you would go directly and complain to whatever producer that you have an issue with. But because we have both large corporations and this society, which is not only that, but this also creates an empty sort of culture where we don't really need to be interacting with any of the people in our immediate surroundings to get any of the things we need. At one point, you would have to be very intimately related to the people around you because you would be dependent on them for manufacturing things and growing for food and all the different things that make the society possible. But because we have this separation, we just go into a grocery store, and the sort of limits of our culture are just like, walking into the grocery store and saying, "Hi, how are you?" and "Thank you," and so on. So not only are we creating these ethical problems that we are unaware of, but we are separating gradually more and more every day as more as the culture gets larger. So if you feel so inclined, if you feel that this is a problem, then the obvious solution is to delegate the allocation of resources not to these far-off corporate entities, but bring it back into your own community. Have a garden. Have people who are participating actively in a smaller setting